Hello, a very warm welcome back. I'm Paul Anderson-Walsh and I'm so pleased you're able to join me as we continue to just walk through and reflect, read, think a little bit about my book, Grace for Grown-Ups. So this is part 3 and we're still thinking about the arc of the book. I'm just still in the introduction talking about how the book's shaped. In the last episode I was telling you about those first 2 chapters, the notion of milk teeth, and then we went on to talk about the idea of when I was a child. So today I'm going to describe the next couple of chapters for you and we'll just reflect and see what's in there for us. So, reading again from Grace for Grown-Ups. Grasshopper Syndrome. Grasshopper Syndrome is the story of the children of Israel spying out the land inhabited by giants. We will reflect upon who we really are, namely fully functioning persons, the sum total of the Christian's journey into maturity. The bar mitzvah boy is about being plunged into the world of the teenager. The key thought here is about identity and identification, and continues our journey into fully functioning personhood. As we discover in the Peter principle, we are not immune to the odd lapse on our way to adulthood. In fact, as we shall see, these lapses are a God meant it for good way of holding up a mirror to our self-sufficiency. So that's the next part of the book. Those next 3 chapters are the key, really. The notion of grasshopper syndrome is a really important one, because you'll remember in the story, won't you, that the children of Israel, when they go to spy out the land, their response is, it's a good land, but there were giants in the land. And when we saw them, they said, we were like grasshoppers in their sight, and so we were in theirs. And this is a massive point about how we perceive ourselves. And I look forward to reading that chapter 2, because there's some really powerful stuff to be said about that. But the most important thing just for now is for us to be able to recognize that for us to move on, for us to move through from the child phase. And listen, the child phase was spectacular. To be able to turn around and say, we know for sure that we know the Father and we know our sins are forgiven, past, present, future. It is an amazing threshold, but there's the much more of the gospel that I'm really desperate for us to get hold of. When Paul talks, John rather talks in this book, when we're going to be looking at, based on 1 John 2, when he starts to say to us that we're strong, we've conquered, we've overcome, the word abides in us. And when we get to the Father level, where he says, you know him who is from the beginning, believe me, there is so much more mystery for us to grab a hold of. And exciting as it is to be able to say, I know for sure that I am safe and sound. Oh, that's a wonderful threshold. But I'm wanting to tell you, there's so much more of an adventure for us to be had. And this is child level for a reason. Gosh, there were so many things when I was a child. I was so frustrated thinking, gosh, I wish I was an adult. Now I'm an adult, I sometimes think I wish I was a child, because there's so many things for me to do. But beloved, there is a huge leap to be had, and that's really going to be very exciting for us to see. And we'll see that begin to turn in the bar mitzvah boy. And the bar mitzvah boy is, I think, a nice chapter, because that's really me starting to tell you not only about the significance of the bar mitzvah in the Jewish tradition, but actually something for me which is a bit of an irony, which I didn't quite understand, and I'll unpack with you, thinking about my own experience as a teenager. I mean, if ever there was a period of life I would never want to live again, it would be my teenage years, and you may well share that idea. And then the Peter principle is important, because that's going to be talking to us about how we move through away from self-sufficiency to Christ-sufficiency. And we'll be thinking very much about one of the greatest figures that there ever was, Peter, from the Gospels himself, and looking at what that principle of self-sufficiency is all about. So once we move from there, we move on to some key chapters. The next one, and I'm back to reading the book now. The next chapter, Adam, Where Are You?, gives us an insight into the fall, as seen through the lens of conversations between the Edenic protagonists. I wanted to find a way to transport us back to the Garden of Eden and stand us next to Jesus to observe the turmoil. We shall also look at the demonic strategy which worked to such good effect against first Adam, but then in the following chapter the silencing of Satan came up woefully short against last Adam, Jesus. By recounting the story of how Jesus overpowered Satan, we will understand that the true insight cannot be understood by a purely cognitive process. It must be caught, and caught through personal experience. And once caught, there's no escape. We don't have it, it has us. If I may, I think of all the things I've ever written, the Adam, Where Are You is perhaps my, I think it's the best and perhaps most important thing I've ever written, because what I try to do there is literally try to recreate the fall, but recreate the fall in a way that I don't think you would have read before. I say that modestly, but I think it's unlikely. Steve McVeigh was kind enough to say he thought it was the most extraordinary thing he'd ever read, which was, bless him, I'm sure that's being hyperbole because he's read and written some pretty extraordinary things himself, but he liked it, and I think there's a reason for that, because it's really trying to place us in the conversation to just really understand what that must have been like. And of course there's a lot of parallel, and I pull a lot of things in from the New Covenant because it's such a key concept to me to think about what happened there. So I look forward to reading that to you. I was excited to write it. When I wrote it literally almost in one take. I was just carried along with it. It was most extraordinary. And then the silencing of Satan's an important piece of teaching, I think, because that's about how we begin to understand what the demonic strategy is, and be clear about this. There is a demonic strategy, but also be clear that we know this. We're the conquerors. Remember, we're the strong, we're the overcomers, and because the word abides in us. So then, having laid the foundation this far, the foregoing chapters follow that. Just See It is the first chapter of what I call the So What, how does all this cash out in real life chapters. Our topic is faith, not ours, but His, and how that faith operates in us. That's going to be an important piece for us as well. I keep saying this, don't I? But I kind of, I think it's all important, and I wrote the book, so I guess I'm entitled to say that. But it's an important distinction that says, how do you move from the idea of having faith in God to having the faith of God? And that's hugely significant. Again, that's one of the real the real defining differences between the child and the teenager. The child has faith in God, but the teenager has the faith of God, and you can imagine, can't you, the difference is just so profound. So faith is very strongly we're looking at there. In Convicted, which is the following chapter, we discuss John 16:8 through 11, and see the keys that the Holy Spirit must convict us on if our graduation from the teenage phase is to take place. Convicted is a call to arms, to adventure, to divine life. The truth is that not many of us come to Christ because life was working without Him. Most of us, myself especially, were washed up on the shores of the Christian life, broken and discouraged. In the chapter From Overcome to Overcomer, we'll see how God makes victors out of victims. Those readers who are anxious to do more than simply read about divine life, but desire to participate in it fully, will rightly ask, well, how do you do that then? How do you move from professing faith in Jesus to possessing the faith of Jesus? Well, soaking the fruits gives us an answer to that most urgent of questions. I must confess a certain fondness for the Word and His words. Of all the things I've learned on my journey, those I share in this chapter are amongst the most important. Well, I surfaced that idea for you in the very first of these talks, and that is, for me, the key. I think if in the last 20 years, that's probably the most important thing I've come to see for myself. With knowledge comes responsibility, and in the chapter you've still got the other three. I want to set us up to realise that as we grow in Him, we'll assume a duty of care for those who Jesus cares for, meaning all of us. Using a number of little parables from my own life, I will aim to recast the profound nature of eternal security. The penultimate chapter, Love Grows, will appeal to the more proactive amongst us. Love, as we saw in the first part of this trilogy, is safe and sound. It's not an emotion, it's a person, and not just any person. It's the person of God. Yes, it's God Himself who is living and active, and who works in you both to will and to do for His good pleasure. In this chapter, we seek to discover what happens around us when this love grows inside of us. I'll end with a very personal story about overcoming self. It ain't over till you sing with the fat lady. Not a story I'm proud of, but hey, what's the point of growing pains if we don't share the lessons we learn with others? Oh yes, one last thing. Biblical language such as father, young men and sons, and other personal pronouns such as he, him and his are seen as analogous and therefore gender neutral. So, I hope you enjoy the book. Do feel free to contact me if you'd like to discuss any aspects of it. But most of all, grow in grace. See you next time when we begin the first chapter, Milk Tea. Look forward to seeing you again. God bless. Bye-bye for now.